So in some games, it matters. The timing of moves matters, and it matters because players understand that they move first or second, and they get to see each other's actions. So we can't use our reduced form payoff matrices in such games because it matters who knows what when. And the games where timing matters, we call sequential games. And I've thought of just a silly example of a sequential game. Let's suppose that Ford and General Motors are in this game, and the game involves whether to offer a hybrid gigantic SUV. I've got a Chevy Suburban pictured here. Ford has the Expedition or the Excursion. They have these huge vehicles, and I don't quite understand it, but some of the hybrid technology is being implemented in fairly large vehicles. Let's just imagine the case where these car makers are thinking about launching a hybrid version of their behemoth, gigantic vehicles. It turns out that hybrid technology can be used to increase fuel economy. It can also be used to increase performance. Electric motor apparently goes from 0 to 60 much faster than an internal combustion engine. That's what my friends that are car heads tell me anyway. So let's suppose that General Motors, because it's bigger and more established, traditionally takes the lead. We often model these oligopolies where there is a dominant firm. One firm seems to be able to call the shots, and usually it's the bigger firm. So let's say General Motors gets to decide first, and then Ford has to choose when to follow or not. And let's go to a new page here and draw the game tree. So the way we do this, we say, okay, GM starts, and GM is at node A, we'll call it. And GM could either offer the giant hybrid, or they could not offer giant hybrid. Well, then Ford gets to move, and Ford could either be at this node, we'll call it B very creatively, or C, depending on GM's move. And we label each node because as we talk about these games, we need to be clear about which point in the game we're at. These games, maybe you could call them a little more complex. So now at B and C, it's Ford's move, so we're going to label that. Ford is the mover if we're at B or we're at C. And then Ford in this game can also offer a giant hybrid or not. A giant hybrid. And then now we're at various payoff nodes. We'll say the game ends. D, E. I'll put in payoff rankings in a moment. And then Ford also, if we're down at C, Ford also has two strategies to offer. We'll call it the GH for giant hybrid, or not offer giant hybrid. And then we'll label these payoff F and payoff node G. And let's think about what those would look like. The worst case scenario, let's say, is that they both offer the giant hybrid. They both have to invest in these new plants, sink a ton of money, and then find that it's a competitive terrain and there's no way they can recoup that investment. So we'll label that one as the worst payoff. And in sequential games, we always list the payoffs in the order of the first moves. So if GM moved first and Ford moved second, then GM's payoff is first and Ford's payoff is second. We don't have to give any more information because that's just always the way you do it in a sequential game. Here, if GM offers the giant hybrid and Ford doesn't, that's going to be the best outcome for GM. And let's say it's the second best outcome for Ford, just because if GM offered a giant hybrid, Ford's just as happy to stay out because it would be too competitive and they couldn't recoup that investment. All right, and I'm making these up, right? Let's say that down here, let's say that GM doesn't offer the hybrid, and then Ford does offer the hybrid. Well, now Ford is the one offering the hybrid, and GM isn't. That's the second best outcome for GM, the best outcome for Ford. And then finally, neither one offers a giant hybrid, and then on the one hand, they didn't have to spend that big money to invest in the new vehicle line, but on the other hand, they missed the opportunity to be the only producer. So we're going to say that's the second worst outcome for both Ford and General Motors. So this is the game that I've made up. And now let's talk about how we solve sequential game. And this is a really important technique. We call it solving the game tree. And we solve a game tree, we solve a sequential game by starting from the end and thinking backwards. And we just are going to start from the end and just think backwards to the beginning, and we'll see how many clear paths we have. Well, let's just take the first payoff. Let's suppose that we're at, first pair of payoffs. We go to the second to last node here. Let's say Ford is at node B, and they could either offer the giant hybrid or not offer the giant hybrid. And if they offer the giant hybrid, they're going to be at their worst outcome. If they don't, they're at their second best. So they're going to not offer in that case. So we can just eliminate this branch of the tree. Now, let's suppose that we're at node C, and here GM hasn't offered the hybrid. Ford, if it offers the giant hybrid, makes its best outcome. If it doesn't, it's at its second worst. So we can just eliminate that not offering. We know if Ford is at node C, they're going to offer the hybrid. All right, well, now we go back one node. And here there's only a two-stage game. Sometimes you have very complicated game trees and multi-stages by multiple parties. They get to be quite a interesting tree, but you still solve them the same way. And so now GM is at node A, and it knows, it can predict what Ford's doing, and it knows if it offers a giant hybrid, Ford is not going to, and then in that case GM gets 4. Or if GM didn't offer a giant hybrid, it knows now that Ford is going to offer a giant hybrid, and then GM's at 3. So which is better, 4 or 3? 4 is better than 3, so GM is going to offer the giant hybrid. And then, sometimes you have more than one game path that's left after this process of elimination, but in a lot of games you just have one. This is called a sub-game perfect Nash equilibrium. Now, it turns out that sub-game perfect is just a game theoretician's terminology. This was one of my fields in grad school, so I'm trying to contain myself to not go too overboard, but I can't resist introducing just a little more vocabulary. Notice, actually I'll leave it to you to verify, this node F is also a Nash equilibrium in the sense that if we hit node F, we will be at a situation where, given the action of the other, neither player has an interest in changing their action. But it's not a subgame perfect one. That is, the game will never get us to node F because of the dynamics of the game. Node E, this whole path that I've circled, is the only subgame perfect Nash equilibrium. It seems, one thing about game theory, it seems in some ways so obvious. So, well, yeah, who would not think through the game from the end? But boy, there's a lot of examples where people have missed this. And if you're the one that doesn't miss this, you're gonna end up doing better in negotiations. The textbook author gave us the one about the makers of Analyze This 2, maybe, where they shot the whole movie leading up to the scene where Tony Bennett would sing, and only after they did all that did they talk to Tony Bennett, and he had all the bargaining power. If they had talked to him first, they could have used Perry Como or Andy Williams or all the other, sort of over-the-hill singers that were still alive at that when that movie was made. A few of them are alive today, of course. Okay, that's the Hollywood executives. Maybe they just missed the boat. Actually, Pacific University is guilty of missing this trick. They didn't come and ask me. I teach a lot of things that our administrators should really ask me about. But anyway, when we built that campus in Hillsborough, before we built that campus, we were looking all around. We looked at Walker and 185th. We looked at, anyway, a lot of different sites. And Hillsborough was in the middle of trying to build up its downtown. The Max had recently arrived there. Anyway, they were really aggressively courting Pacific University to try to get us to locate in Hillsborough. Well, as it turns out, as you know, we did end up located in Hillsborough, but what I could not believe was that it was only after we had broken ground and built the buildings and were ready to open them that any Pacific University officials went to the city of Hillsborough and said, hey, we need some parking and we need some permits in some of these residential zones. And at that point, Pacific had already built the building, and now instead of talking about parking back when Hillsborough was desperate to attract Pacific, and Pacific held all the cards. Well, now once you've built the buildings, city of Hillsborough has had all the cards, and they just held firm and didn't offer many concessions. Pacific ended up having to build they have that intermodal transit center that was built largely with Pacific money. Pacific just got fleeced because of their oversight and not negotiating the parking back at the beginning. And so when you're out in business, think through the whole problem from the end back to the beginning, and have that awareness as you negotiate. Don't leave out something like multi-million-dollar parking facility that you're going to have to build if you think of it later rather than earlier. Anyway, good luck with all that.
Made with Doodlecast Pro.